Hello, grade 12 scholars, it's Miss Novak, and we are ready to dig into lesson 37 of week 8 in your ELA Distance Learning. What can you expect from these videos? Well, I think you know that by now. Some variety, each lesson is different. There'll always be a list of materials and resources that you'll need. I'll make sure to move through an overview of the different lesson components, even a model of that day's task, especially as pertains to writing or reading closely. And last but not least, a preview of the next day's learning. We are in day 4 of this week. Can you believe it? Our title of today's video is ELA G12 W8 L37. We're still utilizing our same text, My Old Home. Today's task is to read paragraphs 53 to the end of the text. And then we're going to summarize that portion of reading and answer some questions. Starting the lesson off with some reminders, you bet. Always remember to share your learning with someone at home or a friend over the phone or perhaps another classmate outside of class hours. It's really important to help solidify your learning. Next, make sure you're deeply engaged in your fluency practice. It's really fun to chart your progress in your grade 12 packet. And lastly, make sure you're making time for yourself in your reading efforts. The recommendation is 20 minutes, but feel free to lose track of time. And now for a riddle of the day. The more of this there is, the less you see. What is it? If you're like me and you need a little bit of extra time, feel free to pause the video here because I'm about to reveal the answer. And the answer is darkness. It's an oldie but goodie, I think. Try to use that one on a friend. Big, bright, beautiful materials. Here we are. Lesson 37 is on page 119. The note catcher is on page, can you guess, 120. The text is on pages 104 to 112. And of course, have something to write with. Pencil, pen, and highlighter. Get these materials together for today's lesson. Pause the video if you need to. Now you know how I feel about this text and its connection to the essential question, and the guiding questions for that matter. I think you'll maybe feel the same way when we reach the end of the story. So just as a refresher, the essential question, what does it mean to call a place home? And the guiding questions, what makes a place important enough to write about? And in what ways is home both a place and a state of mind? I honestly think that this story was meant for these questions. Maybe you'll feel the same way. Let's get started. Our learning target for today is, I can use details from the text to answer questions. Sounds simple, right? Like in lessons past, but we know that there is definitely going to be some work involved. And now for an overview of today's learning. Today we'll start by reading the end of My Old Home and completing our first read annotations. And then you'll go back to closely read a section of the text that talks about how Jin Chu had changed over time. You'll use your annotations to think about the text with someone. Obviously, you'll be discussing it. And you'll end the lesson by writing a summary of the text and thinking about how the text answers the essential question of the unit. What does it mean to call a place home? You know that's my favorite activity. And of course, you'll be reading independently this evening, hopefully making that time. Let's get ourselves into today's lesson. Here's a plug for the first reading process, which we know and love, and we're really used to at this point. Just to let you know, if you haven't already looked into the Pearson Bounce Pages app, you might want to. You can have the text read out loud to you, or you can read it yourself, which is what I did. Quick reminders. Make sure that you're underlining words or phrases that stand out to you, that pop out of the text. Next, make sure that you're drawing a box or circling words that you're unfamiliar with. Remember, we're going to try to solve those with context clues. And lastly, write in the margins of the text your opinions, your questions, your notices, right? Especially as we head into the last portion of the text, you might find that your opinions surge and you have even more questions. Take some time and pause the video to read paragraphs 53 through 88 of the text now. I'd like a chance to first read. This isn't a first read, but I'd like a chance to first read paragraphs 53 and 54 with you. I know you've already been there, done that, but I'd like to bring you into some of my annotations. So if you'd like to follow along, I'm on page 109 of my packet. One very cold afternoon, I sat drinking tea after lunch when I was aware of someone coming in and turned my head to see who it was. At first glance, I gave an involuntary start, hastily stood up, and went over to welcome him. The newcomer was Junchu, but although I knew at a glance that this was Junchu, it was not the Junchu I remembered. He had grown to twice his former size. His round face, once crimson, had become sallow and acquired deep lines and wrinkles. His eyes, too, had become like his father's, the rims swollen and red, a feature common to most peasants who work by the sea and are exposed all day to the wind from the ocean. He wore a shabby felt cap and just one very thin padded jacket, with the result that he was shivering from head to foot. He carried a paper package and a long pipe, nor was his hand the plump red hand I had remembered, but coarse and clumsy and chapped, like the bark of a pine tree. So what I see here in my first glance was that the narrator is surprised by his old friend's appearance, right? Involuntary starts, kind of taken aback, and you can't hide it. Next, I see how the narrator describes how Junchu has changed over the years. The descriptions of how he looks today remind me of someone who has had a really hard life of labor, who has really been worn down by the years. His face is sallow and has many wrinkles. His eyes are red and swollen, so it's not like he's the ultimate picture of health. And I couldn't help but think to myself and jot down the margins, how does this compare with the narrator's appearance? I'm assuming it's quite different. Take some time to review your first read notes, now at this time. And now it's time for our close reading efforts. I'd like you to go back and closely reread paragraphs 54 to 72, so a fair chunk of text. As you reread this section, mark the words that show you how Junchu has changed over time. I gave you a little bit of a preview of what this could look like on that previous slide. Now it's your turn to read these paragraphs and find your own evidence. Take some time to pause the video and to complete this task now. Now let's explore the thinking and talking components of today's lesson. So for this next part of the lesson, you will use your annotations from your close reading to answer a few questions. First, I want you to really try to zone in on paragraph 59. You need to pause the video here, get your book out to circle that paragraph because we're going to talk about it a little bit here. First, think about when the author says, I felt a shiver run through me in paragraph 59. Why do you think he says that? Jot down your answers in the margins of the text. As you think about your answer here, think about how the author builds up to this thought. Based on how the narrator describes Junchu up to this point, are you surprised by the narrator's thinking in paragraph 59? Now, I know some of us might have already gone there with our thinking. You might want to pause the video to engage in this now. Next, what I'd like you to do is to take these thoughts and your notes from the reading, to talk to a family member or friend about how the narrator feels about seeing Junchu. Right? You might even bring up a personal account of what it felt like to see someone after a really long time. Someone you loved, maybe someone you didn't like as much. It's interesting to compare your experience with that of the narrators. Take some time to accomplish these tasks now. Now for our writing task today. As promised, it might be a simple learning target, but there's a lot of work behind it. So for your writing, first you'll write a 3 to 5 sentence summary of paragraphs 53 through 88. In your summary, make sure you note that it is a very clear and concise representation of what actually happens in that portion of the text. Then you're going to use your thoughts from your close reading and discussion to write an answer to the following question. Why is the relationship between the narrator and Junchu different now that they are adults? Finally, I want you to think about the essential question. Remember, this is my favorite when we actually get to tie in the essential question to our reading. What does it mean to call a place home? What and how has my old home helped you understand about what people call home? As you reflect on the essential question, Remember that the narrator realizes his memory of home now is quite different than his memory from his early years, right, when he was growing up. Time has changed both his home, or his perception of his home, and his relationships. Think about this. How does this tie in to what it means to call a place home? You'll be capturing your thoughts in your note catcher. And as always, for this part, definitely feel free to use some evidence from the text in your response. Pause the video now to accomplish these writing tasks. This was a pretty intense lesson, so you might have some questions that are still lingering. If so, and if you would like to, feel free to reach out to your teacher. Their first name, their last name at DetroitK12.org. I'm sure they'd love to talk to you about the entire text even. Really interesting, and especially because it ties into the unit's essential question, etc., etc. So feel free to reach out. As always, let's go over the learning target for tomorrow's lesson, lesson 38. It reads, I can connect my understanding of a text to a guiding question from the unit. You know how much we love this. We are forging connections. We are looking at texts that we've read before. We are focusing on the text here and now. So tomorrow is sure to be an interesting lesson. Thank you so much for engaging in this lesson with me today. I'm particularly happy we finished this text, but that we're still ready to dig a little bit deeper tomorrow. A few quick reminders. Don't forget to talk about your lesson with someone at home or over the phone. It's really important that you help solidify your learning. Next, read for 20 minutes tonight and capture your activity in your reading log. Don't just capture the amount of pages that you read or the time you took, but actually ask some questions of the text. The texts that you read in class aren't the only ones that deserve those questions and notes in the margins. And lastly, practice your fluency. Weekly tip, Thursdays are usually reserved for you to go back and reread that portion of the text and time yourself so you can actually see how much you've sped up your process and hopefully retain some more of the subject matter. We'll see you tomorrow for lesson 38.